Village on Denina land. And I am pleased to be working in collaboration with the UAF Tribes Extension Program. And we are trying to have webinars that showcase topics that are important to people who are growing food in rural Alaska. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interest in this topic, and we have three panelists today from Cordova, Fairbanks, and Igiugig, who have all had different types of experience turning fish waste into fertilizer. Okay, so I'll just hand it over to our panelists now, and if you guys could each just introduce yourselves and give a little introduction about your experience turning fish waste into fertilizer. Um, Kristin, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, folks. Yeah, I'm Kristin Carpenter with the Prince William Sound Economic Development District, and we aren't doing it now, although we might be coming back to it. But from 2003 to 2008 or 9, when I worked at a different nonprofit, the Copper River Watershed Project, we made fish waste compost with fish scraps and sawdust. And I've got a few pictures I can show when it's my turn. But yeah, that's the quick introduction. Yeah, so I said this already, that I am now working with the Prince William Sound Economic Development District. So I just wanted to give people a little bit of a orientation. We are Cordova's over here on the eastern edge of the Sound. And then you've got Titlik, the village of Titlik here, Valdez up in, Port Valdez, Whittier over there in Passage Canal, and Chiniga down here. Oh, New Chiniga is in here. So anyway, that's our region. But when I first started doing fish waste composting was when I worked at the Copper River Watershed Project, and I was the executive director there for about 20 years. And we did composting from 2003 to 2009 or so. And when I started, I literally was like, oh, it's decomposition. It's making dirt. How hard can it be? And you quickly learn there's quite a lot to take in, a lot of things that you have to sort through and make decisions about. And so just as I was thinking about this group and thinking about composting, the things I remember having to sort through, or that anybody just starting out would want to think about, is, what scale are you composting on? And what are your feedstocks? Are you going to do anaerobic or aerobic decomposition? Are you going to use worms? How much material can you manage? And then how are you going to turn your piles over if that's what you're going to do? Okay, I don't know about the audio, sorry. Okay, so then
it sounds good, Kristin. No problem.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. So this was our very first pass at composting. In 2003, we did static windrow piles, and we just, like you can see here, we would shape up the windrow, make a big pile. We put the fish waste and layers with sawdust, and we use these PVC pipes and they were perforated to allow for aeration within the pile. And we built these stick frame structures to go over the pile so we could put a tarp on top of it when it was raining. So pretty rudimentary. And then we got a local guy to take this cannery retort, this 21-foot long pipe that was steel pipe left over from a cannery, 4 feet wide, and he did some welding and basically turned it into a rotating drum for us. He mounted it on it, and that's Rick Schultz here. This is the guy who made it, and his wife Osa. And I just loved the old door with the original handle that was a nice bright shade of red. And he put some vents on the end of it, cut holes in that door, and also in the door at the opposite end to allow for venting. And by mounting it on the hay wagon, it allowed him to set it up as a chain-driven system. So it would rotate, it could turn one full revolution in 2 minutes, I think. It didn't turn very fast. And we also learned from an outfit that manufactured these kinds of in-vessel composting systems commercially, that we angled the back end of the drum was about 2 degrees. I don't remember how much. It was very subtle, but it was a little bit higher than the end where the stuff would come out, which allowed for the material to slowly rotate forward, and it was a lot easier to pull it out. So we used that for several years. We would start with whole fish frames, halibut heads, salmon heads, whatever. We did learn using fish guts. It works if you have other material that can absorb moisture, but all of these things are super high in moisture content. So you have to allow for drainage if you're going to be using a lot of fish waste. And this is loading it into the drum on one end. Again, the guy who did the welding for us cut this door out and put a big long hinge in there. So we would load it. Sometimes we're doing it manually. Sometimes we would have somebody on a forklift to help with loading the all of the fish parts. And then we would open up the door on the other end and rake it out into a tote, and that was the finished product. It was important to let the stuff cure, because if you're just composting with fish and sawdust, the fish are super high in nitrogen, so you have to be careful about that. And we found that the material was way too hot to use right away, so we would let it sit over the winter and then sell it in the community in the spring after it had cured and off-gassed a bit. And we could turn it a little bit more if we just would do that by hand, but that would help with curing the compost until it was ready to use. And I think some of our batches, we started out, we didn't have the ratio of sawdust to fish quite balanced, and the material that we ended up with also was really high in salts. So it was very high in calcium, very high in potassium, but also very high in salt, and which was not good for plants. And so that was part of the trial and error. But these are some resources that I found were super helpful when we were learning about it. The Rodale Book of Composting is a great hand reference. They have all kinds of information with the, I want to say the chemical profile. I don't know if that's the right word, but the balance of materials that you could potentially use as composting feedstocks. They've got a lot of information on the carbon content, the nitrogen content, and the moisture, so that you don't have to do all of that trial and error yourself. The University of Maine Cooperative Extension Compost School is an awesome opportunity. My parents live in Maine, so it was pretty easy for me to go and visit them and go participate for the week-long session one year. That was pretty cool. And the University of Alaska Cooperative Extension also has some composting resources, so that's certainly a good local resource. I can also, and so that was quite a while ago, working with the Copper River Watershed Project, but we're, as evidenced by this workshop, and a lot of interest now in food waste composting as a potential, or as one way of mitigating climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And so we are now looking again at how can we get some kind of larger scale composting effort going in town as a way to help reduce the waste stream coming out of households and restaurants. And I think, and I know too that there are folks interested in composting kelp, although kelp is also about 85% water, so super high moisture content. It definitely has lots of nutrients, but the moisture content is high. So I don't know if it makes sense to try to dry kelp a little bit first and then compost it. I do know that I've heard folks talk about the need to rinse the kelp because it's got salt water on it. So again, you would have that salt content problem. And for us, you know, a lot of places when they talk about composting, they say, well, get grass clippings or other kinds of brush. And probably like a lot of you, we don't have any grass. I mean, we do, but it's in very small patches. So that's as a high, and grass also has a certain amount of nitrogen in it too. So so finding the carbon material to mix with the nitrogenous material is a little bit of a challenge for us, but we've been talking about ways that we could deal with that. We're talking, we'd like to start looking at whether we could compost inside of a high tunnel, if we could do something out at our Mile 13 airport where you could compost at a larger scale, and it wouldn't eliminate the possibility for bear interactions, but it would certainly greatly reduce the probability of bear and people interactions if you're composting in town. Yeah, so let me just see if all seaweeds contain too much salt. Okay, well, yeah. Yes, and in terms of the ratio, I was talking about fish totes. So it's convenient that one fish tote is pretty close to approximating 1 cubic yard. So it was easier for us to do the math that way because they're about 36 by 36 by 36. But again, I think most folks know that the general ratio on whatever scale you're doing composting is 3 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, roughly, depending on your feedstocks. And I was also going to say, oh, okay, and Emily says debate on the salt, so great. And I also I'm going to share one more thing. I have a different screen. In terms of equipment that you might want for composting, we used one of these long temperature probes so that you could get a thermometer all the way into the pile. And you'll want a pH meter. I think those are some basic things for checking on your kind of the temperatures that your compost is maintaining and the pH balance. And the last thing I was going to share that I got from the University of Maine is this spreadsheet, which we used, and anybody could use. You could plug in the information from the Rodale Book of Composting or other resources you have about carbon content and nitrogen content. But it's a way to sort of come up with what they call a recipe, a composting recipe, and how you, just to help you dial in the mix that you want given what feedstock you have at hand. And I would be happy to share this with folks if you want.
Thanks, Kristin. Yeah, if you can send links to all those resources to me or Emily, then we can add them to our resources, and we'll post those with the recording and also put them in the chat.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was super informative. So Jeff, would you like to share next about your approach to doing this?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm Jeff. I live in Igiugig. I've been here a little over 10 years. I moved here as a teacher years ago, and then the farming job came up and nobody was jumping on it. So I got out of the schoolhouse and started farming. I've been doing that about 8 years. The village has a small farm with we've got one greenhouse that we have the ability to heat if we wanted, and then we have 2 NRCS high tunnels also. And we're trying a little different way of fish this year. We've composted it with decent success. Our school kids actually did a science project where they tried composting fish waste versus composting chicken manure versus composting food waste. And they used all the same materials for bulking agents. They used a bunch of peat that they had harvested from the tundra, and then they used alder chips also. And they cooked the piles till they were finished, and then they sent in soil samples, and they hypothesized that the fish waste would be the most nutrient dense of all the piles, just because they used the heads and the guts and the bones and everything, and their hypothesis, according to the soil samples, was correct. So that went really well. And we still do compost a little bit of fish that comes from some of the sport fishing lodges. But our new approach is kind of based on we're looking to expand more, be able to sell more vegetables to surrounding communities and some of these sport fishing lodges we have here on the Igiugig River. So we've got some land cleared, but we have pretty poor sandy, silty soils, no organic matter in them. But we had a building project recently where we asked them to try and scrape off maybe that top inch under the tundra mat that was a little bit decent soil. And so we brought over a couple of truckloads of that, and we're trying to turn that into good productive soil as quickly as possible. So we're trying trench composting. I had my doubts starting out, but so far I like the results, and so that's why I'm sharing them with you. I can share my screen real quick. Let's see. I'll go back. That's Igiugig. The biggest lake in Alaska is Lake Iliamna, and we're right where Lake Iliamna drains into the Igiugig River. Let's see, I better put it on slideshow. Right there. That's our greenhouse and a big pile of compost out front that we're getting ready to shovel into the beds inside of there. Chicken coop, high tunnels, what they look like inside. That's a new apple orchard we just planted in the fall of 2022, so we're not getting any apples off of it yet, but I robbed all the soil from my outdoor beds over there at the greenhouse to plant this orchard. We dug giant holes for each tree and tried to put in good fertile soil. So we have 40 apple trees and 20 hascap bushes we planted there. And so this kind of project that we're doing is part of a collaboration grant awarded to Calypso Farm and some of us partnering villages. And so we're all doing our own individual projects on building soils, utilizing what we have locally. And so this trench composting project is year one of Igiugig's project. And I can share this document with Iva after the thing is over if anybody's interested in looking at it, but this is just kind of some of the tables of information. That top table one shows you what our native soil looks like before anything's been done to it. That's our composting facility. And we get a bunch of lodge food scraps from those sport fishing lodges. So rather than stink up our landfill with those, we started composting those years ago. And then there's also the fish waste portion of things. The Igiugig River gets millions of salmon up every year. They're kind of our lifeblood. And so come early July, everybody's on the river putting up lots of fish. So there's lots of heads and guts and spines. And then also come June, people are starting to clear out their freezers of kind of the freezer burnt stuff. And we've never really had a great way of dealing with those yet. June is before the fish start coming up the river. The bears have come out of the mountains and they're kind of milling around the river and they're looking for something to eat. So this trench composting was kind of a way to minimize any interactions by the bears are busy, you know, once the fish hit the river, come early July, we don't see them again until October, late October, maybe. They eat fish all summer long, and then they go to the hills and they eat berries. And then late October, November is when they kind of come back around. But we were hoping that by putting fish in trenches like this and then covering them back up with the soil, and then we put a thin layer of compost on top of that, and then we planted a cover crop on top of there. And we were looking for a good cover crop that had a nice aggressive root system that would be really thick and lush, something that would just get in there and work on that fish as quickly as possible. So we chose ryegrass, and I think I like the results from that. You can see, so we did this project both with food scraps from the lodges and also with fish waste. I think moving forward, we're probably just going to do fish. After we put the food scraps in the ground, uncomposted, I started to worry about pathogens. These lodges get their food from all over the world, and I don't know how it's being grown. And so I don't really want to introduce anything into my soil that could mess me up for years to come. So that image to the left is what the rows looked like. We started with freezer fish, and then we had a control row next to it, and then we dug our trenches at different depths and added different amounts of food scraps to those to see how much that ryegrass might be able to take care of in one summer. And then we also decided to lime half of those portions as we buried them, also to see if that had any effect. Ryegrass is really tolerant of acidic soils. That another reason why we chose it. And the liming didn't seem to have much effect on the growth of the ryegrass. But we also wanted to see, moving forward, since this grant is building soils, we were going to be taking soil samples to see what that limed or unlimed portions looked like after a soil test. You could see down there in the bottom right corner, that picture shows you the fish waste ryegrass, and it is looking really good. I can't see the date on that, and then the row next to it is the control row where we did nothing, and the ryegrass is looking pretty poor right there. And then the ones after that, the food scraps did pretty well as well. I will add that once it was established, there was virtually no smell in there. I mean, there was maybe smell for a couple of weeks, but it was pretty light, and we didn't worry too much about it because the bears were busy on the river getting fresh fish. But you can see there is a fence around there. We used kind of a plastic mesh fence, but then on the outside of that, there's an electro mesh electric fence that we've had around our compost for years, and it does pretty darn good. We shocked the hell out of several bears in there, and you can see it when they get shocked. They get really mad and scratch around and then run off. But it does pretty well, and there were no bear prints anywhere around that fence all summer long into the fall. Not until I decided to terminate the cover crop. We weed whacked it all, and then we tilled it all in. That was a mistake that I probably won't do again, because it was really stink once we tilled it up, and it stayed that way for a couple of weeks. And I decided to open up that fence because I didn't want bears just tearing up my fence. And they wandered in there and they dug around a little bit, but they didn't do any damage really. And so that's what we're doing. I have that whole report available if anybody wants to look at it. And we're going to keep on going with this method and kind of figuring out, like I said, I don't think I'll do food scraps anymore, but I am going to do fish waste again this summer, and probably another year of cover crop. And then the following year, I'm going to plant on it. I don't have all the details figured out yet, but yeah, I like these results so far, and that's Igiugig.
That's really fascinating. I like how you set it up like a matrix. That's cool. Dr. Zhang, would you like to share some?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Mingchu Zhang. I'm the professor in soils and / agronomy in the University of Alaska Fairbanks in the Natural Resources and the Environment Department. Regarding let me just say a little bit of compost and fish. I work on the compost prior to my coming to Alaska. I was working with the city of Edmonton in Alberta, Canada, on the municipality sewage sludge, solid waste, co-composting. And then I came here and I work with the people with the fish waste to do the fish waste, the composting. So let me just share you with the slides I have with respect to what kind of work I have done with the fish compost. So in terms of fish waste utilization, I mentioned earlier, I think at the time, maybe most people have not registered or signed in yet. Fish is very, very rich in nitrogen resources, which is a part of a plant nutrients, important one to promote plant growth. And in terms of fish utilization, I work with 3 kind of levels of fish waste. One is like an individual farmer from Delta, which is not in this slide. He has a connection with a hatchery in nearby hatchery. He can get the fish, like 100 fish or 200 fishes from the hatchery plant, and he wants to find a way to use that. And of course, I check if he has some sawdust or wood chips or any carbon source. He doesn't have. He just have the land growing the vegetables. So I recommend him just dig a hole, just very similar to what Jeff did. Dig a hole, put a 1 fish, bury some soil, and put 1 vegetables on the top. He keep grow like lettuce and rhubarb, actually. And after that, he told me it was very successful. That's without any composting, direct put a fish there, because fish decomposes very fast. So it's just like the nutrient source. Similarly to any chemical nutrient source, it is quite just release out the nutrients fast. Second level is the one we did with the gentleman in the key line. He is the plumber. He has a labor with a lot of fish waste. And he had the plumber just purchased some land. He wants to put nutrients there to make the land more fertile before he grows some the grasses for the haze. So again, check the carbon sources, no carbon sources at all. So I recommend to him to do the anaerobic digestion. So he put a huge tank and asked his labor, get the fish waste and put the fish waste in the tank. And then, excuse me, seal it over, and then
Dr. Zhang, sorry to interrupt. Your slides aren't advancing. I don't know if you were trying to show.
No, this is allowed in the slides. Last one I will say something about the slides, because this is
cool.
some examples I want to mention. So he put a fish in there, and he told me about a week or so, he told me no cooking. Nothing happens inside, because of course, it's just fish waste, low carbon source. So I recommend him just purchase a few bags of wheat flours, dump that wheat flour in, And immediately after he dumped wheat flour in the tank, 2 days later, the whole tank started to be hot and started to cook. And then after that, he got the fish waste, it's a slurry, and then he pumped that to the field, what he has. So make it a good pasture growing. So let me just push in here, again, this is a slide. So in the third level of the compost, I want to talk about the nutrients a little bit. This is a plant essential nutrients. There are 16 plant essential nutrients. And this barrel here, each barrel represents 1 nutrient. If all the nutrients in an adequate level, the barrel can hold enough water, which is a full capacity. If 1 nutrient is in deficiency, which means the barrel cannot hold that much water unless you supply that nutrients to the, or you make that barrel higher, and then you can correct that nutrient deficiency. Similarly, in the soil, if nutrients is in deficiency in soil, you need to make the correction. Fortunately, in those organic waste, in particular the fish waste that we have a lot of different nutrients in the fish waste if we use them for the as a plant nutrient supplies. Here is the analytical results that it shows to the carbon level in the fish head. Nitrogen level is pretty high, 5%, and the serum ratio is less than 9. Is 9, and this a little bit lower for just automatically composting happening. You need to have carbon source there to make it work. A lot of phosphorus, which is very deficient in our soil here in Alaska. Also a lot of potash. And along with that is calcium, magnesium, copper. All those are plant required nutrients except the sodium. That's why I see some comments on the salt content. And later on, I will talk a little bit about where the salt is coming from. And this is another, I said, 1 fish, 1 hole for directly put in the soil for growing the vegetables. That's 1 level. Anaerobic digestion, put the fish waste in the tank. That's another level. This is a 3rd level. This is just a fish compost pile. This is experiment we did that in 2009 in Homer, East End of Road. And fortunately, this owner has the land, has a peat moss. So he dig out the peat moss and pile that up, dig a hole in the middle, and just put a fish waste tot inside there. And in this one, I had a report. And if anyone interested in this report, I can just email that to anyone. I maybe just email to Eva, and Eva can dispatch that to the one who is interested in that. And then we have this temperature probe put in a fish pile. This probe will automatically recording the pile temperature cross out the compost period. And this is the time when the owner started to turn the piles. You can see the steam comes out. That's fish which means fish decompose, work with the carbon very closely with the aid of the microorganisms. And you still can see some fish debris there. And this is another one. It's after turning, you can see some partially decomposed fish. Again, during the decomposed working, when you close to the pile, you still have very, very strong smell. You know, one story I always said is we left in Fairbanks to the site. We left Fairbanks early in the morning. Getting to the site is about 5:30, and we work on the compost pile. And after we finish, we take off and went to our homestead restaurant. And we didn't realize how stinky our clothes is. You know, we sat in the restaurant, and I spotted a few beautiful dressed tourists walked in, sat beside us, and we focused on the computer, working on the temperature data. Few minutes later, I was around. Those people move further away from us to the corner because our nose cannot tell the smell we have in the clothes because stay in the compost pile too long. So it did not smell, but after compost is finishing, there's no smell at all, right? This is a kind of like a close to finished compost. And this is how temperature changes, this I can tell, this is ambient temperature, which is air temperature. These are two probes in the two different locations, and this is the air temperature. And this is the time the owner turns the compost pile. Each time he turns, temperature drops, then cook again, he turns, then drops, and then goes up, and then probably will slow down, which means compost stabilized and it can be used. So we didn't stop in there. We test the compost, how to find a method to recommend people how to use that. This is the control, which means the soil without anything. But this is a control with a compost addition. And this is control again. You see the growing is, we have the radish, we have green onion, we have broccoli. So with the best growth is with the 50-50. 50% compost, 50% soil. And if you apply more than 50% of compost, all those plants were suffering in terms of salt injury. And then you may question me, because we use the peat moss, we use the fish, where's the salt coming from? Because during the decomposition process, you see the heat, you see the carbon dioxide released out. So everything in the salt, in the peat moss, everything in the fish, which are in the forms of those elements, they concentrate, they shrink, body shrink, because the CO2 released out, that's a lot of mass. And these shrink out relatively concentrated on those elements. So that expressed as a salt content. Do I make myself clear here? Because it's really, the system lost CO2, carbon, and then it's shrinking concentrate on those salt. So therefore, you cannot directly use a compost, fish compost, or any compost as your bedding material for your seedlings or potting materials. They will kill it. It germinate is fine. When it grow in a certain size, it will all die because of the salt injury. So my cutoff for this compost experience is the 50% of compost is the threshold. No matter in volume, no matter what other materials add, peat moss or soils, that should occupy at least 50%. If you use more than that volume, you may have suffering of some injuries, unless you grow fairly salt tolerant plants. But in most of our vegetables, they are not fairly salt tolerant. And this is another one we also tested in the haze. This is early, this side is receive the fish compost. The further side is not receive anything. Of course, this is pretty in the early stage. You can see a lot of dentalites growing. But then in the later stage, the further far away one, those are the Timothy haze receive the compost. These are the Timothy haze without the compost. So there's a sharp difference in terms of the growth of the hay. And the funny story is because we all know that the organic source of nutrients have a long-lasting impact. 6 years later, farmers told me he still can see the impact where you apply those fish waste, that landmarks. And if you are not in the large scale, you can do a small scale, and you may not need any large facilities to do a small compost, since you can use this garbage tank, mixed with some carbon source and to play with it. So for the carbon source, this is the one Alaska are short of. If you have access to the clippings, grass clippings or peat moss, you can mix that as a carbon source. And some people use the car box, because in Alaska, it's kind of a one-way traffic. You have a lot of car box in some road and communities. But when you use a carbox, it has an issue because the carbox don't have a pore space in between. So aeration is the issue. If you put a fish waste and the carbox in the pieces, small pieces, later on you will smell ammonia emitted out because there's low aeration inside. So if you want good aeration, you need to put some wood chips there so that you have a pore space, allow the aeration. And then you have a carbon, and then you have a nitrogen source, which is a fish waste. So this is what we did in the past. We used to analyze what compost have, what nutrients have for the compost, fish compost in particularly. And I like to use this one. I mean, everybody knows where this one is, right? This is the Homer. And there's a poem inside that kind of a pavilion there. What it says, the sea tells a story. It tells one cycle of life. Running through its water, fish spawning, dying, sinking to the ocean floor, returning to the circle of engulfed old life. What we did here, we did composting. We used composting to support the plant growth. We try to recycle that. We do not waste that. That's very, very meaningful things, because in general, people have a concept of recycling of the paper, recycling of the plastic, recycling of the bottles. But actually what we did here, or what we encourage people to do, is the recycling of the nutrients. This is significant to our environment, also to our livelihood in the state. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to make sure now that we're in the question and answer portion, looks like a student in Hooper Bay Charter School had a question. How long does the organic waste take to turn into compost? And that was for you, Dr. Zhang.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
About a month in Homer situation, and I see the some people have shortened that process because he mixed the carbon and the nitrogen very well. I mean, one example is a lot of fish waste. I forgot to mention, because there's another successful compost business in the Kilai Homer area, is the retired professor from the Kilai College. He's a welder too. He collected a coffee ground from the coffee shop, which contain 80% nitrogen. And also he collect the waste materials from the mushroom growers. He put these two together, and he can manufacture the compost and sell to the nearby community. You know, about 3 weeks. You know, in the summertime it's very fast. In the wintertime, you know, shoulder season's slow because ambient temperature is low. I don't have a photo here. He turns that the windrow compost pile of the coffee ground and the straw from the mushroom grower. The steam just comes out, and he was pretty successful.
Well, thank you. And then there was a question for Jeff. How do you keep pathogens out of the fish waste row? Where you just put the fish waste directly into the ground? Because I know you were talking about the pathogens potentially being introduced by food waste.
Yeah, I replied to that in the
Okay.
Q&A, but that's a really good question, and the answer is I don't have a science-minded brain, and I don't know. With the food waste, you know, I'm getting anything from steaks and pork and chicken and salmon and all kinds of vegetable scraps and stuff. And it's, you know, we know that our food comes from all over the world, and not everybody has the same agricultural practices. And I just, it's something that scares me, not knowing where that food comes from. But the fish, I know where that is coming from, and I don't worry as much. as far as the pathogens go, I definitely won't be doing any kind of root crops, no potatoes, turnips, rutabaga, nothing in those rows for at least a few years until I feel better about the processes that have gone on underground. That compost is mostly, or that fish is mostly composting underground anaerobically, so it's a slower process. But I think I would feel confident planting root crops probably after a few years. But for now, like my test crops, I think after I do one more year of this, I'll probably just test crop some of my go-tos like cabbage and kale in there, and I'm probably gonna do varying levels of nutrient recommendations. Like Dr. Zhang had said that you know, people have been burying fish and planting crops right on top of it for thousands of years, you know. So I want to see how much less nutrients I have to add to my soil. Everything costs a ton of money to get out here. You know, we're talking $1.20 a pound for me to get my lime, for me to get my fish meal, anything. So the less I have to use of any of that, the better. So I'm going to kind of stagger my use of lime and nutrients and see how like some of these heavy feeding brassicas come up. I got a couple more years in this project, but I foresee trying to fine tune something like this for the next 5-10 years till I get what I'm looking for.
Yeah, building healthy soil is definitely a long game. Colleen had a question about how you collect the food waste and make sure it didn't have inappropriate stuff in it.
Well, the lodges all use our landfill here in Igiugig, and obviously you saw the buckets and buckets. I get 20 to 30 buckets like that per week. And after years and years of trying to get them to separate vegetables from meat, from grease, I've gotten to the point where I'm just like, just keep the grease and butter out of it, you know, please. And everything else I'll take. Like I said, the bears seem to have plenty to eat on the river and leave the compost pile alone. So meat is a little bit stinkier when it's composted, but we have plenty of carbon. We have a big wood chipper in our landfill, and we do quite a bit of brush work around our roads and trails and things. So we have no shortage of wood chips we use to add to that pile. And yeah, it smells a bit, but we don't usually have any bear problems till maybe late in the fall. And I also have to add, because I was telling Iva this before, I was checking out the resources posted. There is a resource from Sea Grant that is titled "How to Compost Fish Safely and Legally," which I admit that I never knew the legal part of things. So you can see that I've just thrown whole fish carcasses into those trenches, but according to the law, there are some things that you should consider so you don't bring in, you know, obviously make dangerous situations. We live in bear country, and we deal with bears every year, and people are wise to that, but you also need to be wise to how you're going about your business.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone?
Just want to have a comment here. For the compost pile temperature, I mean, if the passaging control for most of them, because the EPA require 160 degrees Fahrenheit. If your temperature cannot reach that high, probably you should be hold it back when you want to sell to somebody, because it may have some risk issue there. So if I remember that number correctly, I think it's 160 EPA required. for the killing the pathogens in the waste. But some other situation, I mean, it's not common here, because I came from Alberta. I mean, Alberta have some dead animals like cows, sheep, and even due to composting, may not eliminate some of those disease-causing microorganisms. So that should be like a medical disease, cannot be killed even in the 160-degree Fahrenheit. So this, you have to be cautious. I mean, for your own use, you know how to handle that. But when you try to sell to your neighbors, and that you need to have some cautious there too. If you want to do that, that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
thank
think
you for
that-
that. I'll definitely put that on my list of things to look into for this
Yeah,
year. coming
and
up, how to
Jeff, I
test
mean,
for
just
that.
if you want to monitor those temperature continuously, I mean, if you have an active project going on with the NRCS or USDA, you can purchase some of those hobos, you know, with
Mhm.
data log, just probe that into the pile. You don't have to worry about it. You can record those temperature depending on the time slot you want to set up. You want to 5 minutes or even a second, whatever, because they just automatically record the temperature in the pile until the data log is saturated or is full. So then you download the data log, I can see what's going on, just like what I showed that in my slides. You can see the temperature variation there. So yeah, I mean, this is just a. I think you did great, you know, in terms of utilization of the waste, to get the nutrients for those remote community. That's the one I encourage people to do, because you purchase chemical fertilizers. That's very, very expensive. May not reach the effective level as you have those fish waste used as fertilizers. Because we used to have some fish processed waste, like a bone meal, fish bone meal, fish meal, fish hydrolysate from the Kodiak, because that's a test trial. And we compare that with the chemical fertilizers like urea, phosphorus, you buy from the big box store. They are just as effective, quickly as effective as those chemical fertilizers you purchased. So I think you did great, and you put a fish in you just did the trenches, put the fish in. That's also a very simple, effective way. I think the reason you left over some smells of your tilled land, maybe you put a little bit too much, sing it over, it will make a big difference there.
We have another question about, can you just use guts or with no meat or bones? Will that work? Has anyone done that?
My personal experience, a lot of research, you still need you need to mix some carbon source there in order to make it work. Otherwise, it's just no matter what you put in a sealed tank or sealed barrels, you still have those kind of smell coming out. And if you leave that in the open, you probably have issues with your families.
Yeah, John, the science project that I mentioned our high school kids did was using fish waste from fish camp. So that was fish heads, spines, and guts only. And like I said, it ended up being the fish waste pile was the most nutrient dense. And if I'm just using my own common sense, I would think, you know, the organs contain some of the highest amounts of nutrients, a lot more than the flesh. You know, you see the bears, they go after the eyeballs and the skin and whatnot. So I would think that using the guts is, you know, using the best part in your compost. But like I said, I'm not a scientist.
You did a great.
You have some experience with that with you. I think you mentioned you didn't use the guts or something. That was for you, Kristin, sorry.
We did use the guts initially, but just found out they have super high moisture content. And so as long as you've got something to absorb that, or you've got a way, if like we were doing it in a vessel, so there was quite a bit of drainage. If you're doing it in the ground in windrows or burying trenches, that's probably less of an issue. And it's probably less of an issue in a climate that isn't as wet as ours.
And I had a follow-up question actually to one, Jeff, we'd love if your students have published that science fair work, we'd love to be able to read that and add that to our resource list. And then my next question, which is really to all of you, is, a lot of rural communities, sourcing that bulking agent is a problem. Do you think, but a lot of them do have a lot of cardboard. Do you think cardboard would work as the bulking agent, the carbon source?
You need an aeration. You probably need a wood chips there for aeration, because cardboard, when it is wet, it all stick together. Don't have aeration in between, and then you have a strong ammonia smell. So you need some wood chips in between to keep the aeration, so that the bacteria can use that carbon. Otherwise, the whole community switch to the anaerobic, and which is not as effective as aerobic one in terms of decomposition.
What about communities that don't have wood chips though?
That is hard. Just put one fish, one hole, just like dig trenches. That might be. That's why I emphasize we did that. We do have that experience. We command the grower, vegetable grower in the Delta, to just dig a hole, put a fish down, and put a vegetable on the top. Still works, Even though bells sometimes they cannot smell that deep, because soil is in very, very good filter out the smells.
It's been suggested to me to use cardboard before, and we actually we've tried cardboard in different ways. If a lot of our villages have IGAP programs where you could write in for an intern to just be collecting cardboard and shredding it. You could buy a shredder with your IGAP funds. We're such a small community. We only have 70 people, and a lot of us wear multiple hats, and we just don't have time to deal with cardboard in that way. I would use it. Our best recipe so far has been a mixture of wood chips and grass clippings. Anywhere where the earth has been disturbed for building or whatever, you're going to have grass start to grow in there, and so we just come in and we mow it for people, and they love it. I think they have a lawn, but I've also been told by our IGAP coordinator that she found out, and I haven't verified this, but companies like Amazon and some of these other large shippers, Walmart or whatever, they actually use rodenticide in their cardboard, which might make sense. So I don't know about putting that in my compost pile, but like I said, I haven't verified that either. So.
What is that called?
Like a rodenticide to keep mice and rats out of their packaging facilities.
Oh no.
So it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be worth looking into for sure.
Yeah. New fear on. Yes.
Any other questions? And no question is, I know a lot of this information is kind of at like a higher level, assuming you already know some basics about composting. So if anyone is totally lost, there's lots of resources out there that are just basic composting. The UAF Cooperative Extension is a great resource, and I also posted something in there from, I think, the Cornell Cooperative Extension that's just a basic composting. All right, well, if you think of any questions later, just feel free to email us or email Jeff. Our email is grow@ruralcap.org. And thanks everyone for sharing your lunch with us.